Welcome back, everyone, to my channel. Today, I got a fun one for you. It's another Boba deck, but this one is double yellow and revolves around events. This deck is super fun to play. If you guys were wondering how to put together such a deck, this would be a great starting place. Before we get started, uh, you do not have to play this double yellow. You could actually, if you wanted to, play any color with Boba in this version. You could, if you just really want to play Overwhelming Barrage, then play green. If Power of the Dark Side is your friend, then play blue. The sky's the limit, but here is my favorite version of the event deck. And without further ado, let's get into it. So first up, we're playing Greedo, slow on the draw. So when he dies, he gets to deal 2 damage sometimes. We do play 16 events, so Greedo does a pretty good job at doing the extra 2 damage. I'd say about a third to a half of the time he's getting in there. And yeah, he's very powerful. Playing him on turn 1 and having 3 attack is very strong. The other turn 1 plays in the deck are going to be Bib Fortuna and Crafty Smuggler. You're probably never playing ISB Agent turn 1, but sometimes you do if you have a target. There's just not many targets that you can kill easily on turn 1. So our other two options of Bib Fortuna and Crafty Smuggler are both shielded units, which is really strong in this deck since we play a bunch of events that pump our attack up. And because we're shielded, we'll get to trade with a bigger thing and stay alive, which is cool. Bib also, supports an event theme because it makes our events cost 1 less. This card is actually really cool outside of yellow because your opponent sometimes just, doesn't see the card coming. Like, playing Overwhelming Barrage on turn 4 can be really, really strong if you want to go that green route. So, yeah, look at the other versions. This card is very underrated. I know people don't like that it only has 1 attack, but it's very hard and annoying to kill outside of a Sabine 2-drop. So Bib can do a lot of damage, and people, don't always see this card coming. And Crafty Smuggler is just a strong card, right? We're only playing 2 copies of this ISB agent because, again, it's not our turn 1 play. If we draw it early, we probably have to resource it because we're trying to do other things. But this card in the mid game can do some really cool things. I'm actually really looking forward to more win plate effects like ISB Agent so that we could play the spaceship that starts bouncing our things. I did play around with that, but there's not enough synergy yet to go that way. So I'm looking forward to more win plate effects so we can start bouncing our own cards and getting insane value. But yeah, we almost always have an event in our hand, so he always goes off. He's just a little weak body, like a 1/3 is not that great, right? I would much rather him be a 3/1 with the same effect, but is what it is. So outside of turn 2 plays, we got a 2/3 drops in the deck. We have Boba and Bodhi. We can also play the 7th Fleet Defender in space. Ideally, we're probably playing Bodhi or Boba though on our 3 resource play. So Boba, the classic 3/5, you gotta play him. He's insane. And Bodhi Rook, this card is actually really cool. When he plays, he looks at opponent's hand and discards a non-unit card from it. So sometimes you're really sad and they only have units, but surprise, surprise, there's a lot of non-units in this game. And if you play against the Boba Green mirror match, we keep talking about the card, but this discarding Overwhelming Barrage is really, really powerful play. In fact, almost discarding anything out of your opponent's hand could be really strong, and just getting that game knowledge, because it's really hard to gain more card advantage back in this game. I've actually talked a lot about how you don't really need draw power because you're drawing 2 cards a turn, but when you do lose 1 card, it feels really, really bad. And this deck has the opportunity to make you discard a couple cards, so sometimes your opponent just doesn't get to play their cool late game cards because they lost them early and then don't draw them later. And so that's one of the reasons this deck can get away with not playing such a high curve. But yes, let's move on to the 4 drops. So we always want to be seeing Jabba the Hutt. Outside of a trick deck, this card is pretty underwhelming, but having 8 defense means this guy almost never leaves the field. It's like a free 2 damage every turn. Most people don't want to spend all of the resources. Sorry. Most people don't want to spend all of the resources and cards to kill the Jabba just because he's so big. And also, he draws you a card most of the time. I think we have 9 tricks in the deck, so looking at the top 8 and getting one should happen almost all the time. For our 5 drops on the ground, we have Bosk and Cantina Bouncer. So Cantina Bouncer has not the best stats, but a very strong effect of just bouncing anything besides the leader back to hand. The amount of tempo this card offers is really, really insane. Um, or you could just, play to start your turn and bounce like that 4 drop they played the turn before back to their hand, and you just save a lot of damage. Him having 5 defense is pretty important, as 5 is a good threshold in this game. He does survive a few things, and hits for 3 back, but very, very good unit at just spot removal. And in the late game, they play a big thing. You just go bounce it to your hand, and we have so many bounce effects that they're going to realize they don't really want to be playing big things. Our other 5 drop is Bosk. Obviously, he's an event build around card. When you play an event, you may deal 2 damage. He also comes out with Ambush. If this card sticks on your field, you're pretty much never losing. The ability to just do multiple instances of 2 damage every turn is pretty crazy. So we like the Bosk. And if you didn't notice, we got this cool underworld theme going on. So if you guys like theme decks, this is definitely going to be the one for you. All right. Our last ground unit and underworld card is Bounty Hunter Crew. This card has really, really bad stats. Yeah, the ambush doesn't make up for it too much. If you look, it's 1 weaker than Bosk, which is, it's cost 1 more. But it has this really cool when played effect that says you can return an event from a discard pile to its owner's hand. So yes, you can return your opponent's events to their hands. I don't know why you would want to do that, but you can return your own events to your hands, and that makes this card very toolboxy. It gives you exactly what you need. It gives you your no good to me deads back later in the game, which is really great, really crazy. Say crazy, all right, crazy, crazy. But yeah, so this card just being a toolbox makes it worth playing 3 of in your deck, even though he has not the greatest stats. I do think you can find ways to get the value in, especially since we are playing, Boba as our leader. Him paired with Boba kills most things in the game. But yes, this card does die to almost everything. But that's okay because it draws us a card back. And we got to do it for the themes, right? And then we only have 6 space units. So 7th Fleet Defender, we already talked about. It's not our ideal 3-drop play, but sometimes we do it, especially if we're feeling pressured in the space. Otherwise, we're just playing one of the best cards in the game, of Fet's Fire Spray. A creature with haste, a unit with haste is really good. Comes in, just hits them for 5, and has 6 defense, so it's really hard to kill. Its action ability even comes up sometimes. Coughing today, and it keeps you alive. So, yeah, we got to play 3 Fet's Fire Spray. Very, very powerful card. When you look at the Bounty Hunter Crew, obviously this card takes the cake, but the Bounty Hunter Crew is way more on theme for our deck. But, there we go. And let's get into the events. This is the fun part about the deck. We're playing Shoot First, Asteroid Sanctuary, No Good to Be Dead, Surprise Strike, Waylay, Cunning, 1 Change of Heart, and 1 I Had No Choice. If you look, a lot of these cards are 2s of. They're 2s of because we do have a little bit of search in our deck with Jabba the Hutt. And so just we could play more variety of events. We do want to have a nice variety in here because we are playing the Bounty Hunter Crew. So we are able to, recur different events later in the game. So we do want to have a nice variety. But our tricks are Shoot First, Asteroid Sanctuary, Waylay, one of the best tricks in the game. Probably the best, and 1 copy if I had no choice. I'm not really, I don't really like this card too much, but it's nice that sometimes in some games you want this card, and because it's a trick, it's searchable not only from your deck but in your grave. So having just the option of this is nice, especially against the slower decks. Putting something to the bottom and returning to hand is just a lot of value you can gain, even though it costs 7. You could be returning like a 5 and a 6 back, right? So then you're way up in resource cost if you think about it like that. So yeah, and having more bounce effects never hurts. We main 1 Change of Heart. This card can actually sometimes just win games. Your opponent doesn't really always think about the late game in the sense that, oh, they can take my guy and kill me, right? They play a big guy. You just take the initiative. Next turn you go Change of Heart, and now they have exactly 1 turn, like one very small window to kill their own card and not die. So Change of Heart can just win the game. That's why we're also, we can talk about the side real quick, we'll talk about it later, but that's why we're also playing 2 more on the side against these slower matchups, where we can just really take advantage of them playing these big cards and then dying to them themselves, which is very funny. We get to play one of the best double yellow cards in Cunning. People play this card when it costs 6, so of course we're going to play it when it costs 4. I would say this card is very skill testing when you play it, as it's not obvious what the best thing to do is. Giving a unit +4 attack is nothing to scoff at. That's a lot, right? Exhausting units is good. Making your opponent discard could be crucial depending on their hand size, and obviously a bounce effect never hurts. So knowing how to play this card, is very game dependent, very matchup dependent, and the more you play this deck, the more it will help you understand how to use Cunning. Like we said, Waylay is the best card, the best trick, one of the best cards in the game. Actually, I love yellow so much just because of Waylay. In a lot of games, I don't like these bounce effects, but in Star Wars, I really like it because of just how the resource system works and how the turns work, and that because your opponent just doesn't get a whole turn to play cards, when you bounce it, you're suddenly maybe taking initiative on a later turn. Like you're really skewing how the game goes. They also might just lose that card forever because it's not worth playing anymore, so they just have to resource it instead. Waylay sometimes just feels like a straight up removal spell that only costs 3. And in the late game, when your opponent's playing 8, 9, 10 drops, and you just go 3-drop bounce, like you're winning there. And that's why Darth Vader, guys, is such a good card, because not only does it attack when it comes in, but it summons another thing. So it helps avoid getting outed by Waylay. If you guys were wondering why Darth Vader's so good. For our 2-drop spells, we have Asteroid Sanctuary, No Good to Be Dead, and Surprise Strike. No Good to Be Dead and Asteroid Sanctuary are very similar in what they do by tapping things. It does suck cutting a No Good to Be Dead, but I wanted to make room for some other events in the deck. And, we're not super control-y, we are more tempo-y, so we don't need all 3 copies of this. And the Sanctuary, same thing, we don't play that many units that cost 3 or less because we're so event-heavy. But, when this does give a shield to a Boba Fett, you're pretty happy. And we have to play some copies of Shoot First. Being able to strike first is really nice, but it's also just a searchable trick. And I like the art because, poor Greedo. Let's talk about the sideboard, and then we will talk about what we want to do in a game-to-game basis. So we have this really cool card called Confiscate in our sideboard. This is so we don't die to the, Exodia upgrade deck that, just plays Shroots and puts a million upgrades on him, and you have a hard time removing it because all of your removal spells are bounce effects, but for non-leader units. So Confiscate sometimes actually just kills their leader because they're relying on the upgrade to carry over into the next turn. So you're going to side in Confiscates against that matchup, which can actually be a pretty tough matchup for you. So that's why the Confiscates are in here. Otherwise, I'd say this card is like pretty awful most of the time. And, but it is recurable in our deck, so do keep that in mind. And if your meta has a lot of Shroots in it, I would actually play a 3rd copy of this. That deck is real, despite what people think. That is a real meta deck. I think it's at least tier 2. So I would definitely have some amount of space of answers for that card. Next up, we have some anti-aggro cards. We have Cartel Spacer, Outer Rim Headhunter, and Strafing Gunship. The Cartel Spacer is really good at just tapping down units. You're going to bring this card in versus Sabine most of the time, and any other thing that's going really fast, maybe Leia. But you get to play a space unit, which can help attack their space units, and at the same time tapping down something. Maybe even their leader if they're playing Sabine, which is why we play the copies. Outer Rim Headhunter is really good against an aggro mid-range deck that doesn't play many space units. If you notice game 1 that they don't seem to be playing space units at all, pretty similar to our deck, you probably want to bring this in, as it's going to be, very hard for your opponent to deal with and very annoying, as it taps down units every single turn that we have Boba alive. And if you haven't noticed, Boba is hard to kill. So Strafing Gunship, very similar. If our opponent does not have many space units, then we want to be playing Strafing Gunship and just control the ground with this card. It's going to be really annoying for them to deal with as well. And we've already talked about the change of heart. We instantly win this with this card against these late game decks that don't respect us taking their unit and then killing them with their unit, which is a very, very fun way to win the game. All right, guys, so let's talk about why we want to play this deck anyway. So why we want to play this deck? Well, it's super cool, right? We're playing all these Underworld units. We're playing Boba Fett. Like, this is just a really cool deck to play. Do I think it's tier 1? No, I do not. But I do think this card can go to a locals and 4-0, and you will have a lot of fun playing it. So that is the why we're playing the deck, because it's cool. I like these themed decks. I think this like classification of events deck can become very strong in the future. So get your reps on it now so that you know exactly what the deck needs when the cards come out, and you will be one step ahead of everyone else. But the idea is that you're controlling the early game with Crafty Smuggler and Boba Fett, these really sticky units that have, shield and high defense, and you are controlling the game until we get our Boba Fett online. And we're just doing a lot of cool and annoying things to our opponent. We're making them discard cards, we're tapping down their units, we're getting in poke damage. We have so many cards with ambush and bounce. I mean, if you look at like our cards, they're just always doing something when we play them. Ambush, return to hand, ambush, draw a card, make your opponent discard a card. Like, all our cards have this immediate value when we play them, so that when they do get removed, we don't feel as bad. And that's kind of like the point of the deck, right? We get to use this huge variety of events throughout the game. And again, if you look at our curve is really low. Like, we have a lot of options the more resources that we get online. And yeah, so that is the how-to with the deck. And in terms of mulliganing, you want to make sure you always have a turn one play. As always, is my belief. I don't think any deck should really be skipping their turn one, regardless of their like game plan and later. The only thing you really don't want to be doing is playing ISB Agent turn one. So do be looking for Crafty Smuggler or Greedo, and of course the Bib. So there's 8 cards that you want to see early, which is on my low end. I actually like looking for 10, but we technically do have 10 cards that we would play. Let's say that you mulligans and you only opened ISB Agent. Depending on your matchup, you can consider playing it or not. If your opponent played a 2-3, then you could probably play the ISB agent out, especially if you have like a surprise strike or something else to help kill something on the next turn. But if they play a 3-2, well, if you have the event, then I guess you could play ISB agent out with the sole goal of trading it next turn. So again, it does have like some, use on turn one, but we're obviously looking for one of the 3 other cards instead. Against control matchups, you just want to be making sure you discard as many cards from their hand as possible while maintaining, a nice board presence. This deck can actually be really annoying for control because of like the Bodies. We could like, oh, there's your Power of the Dark Side, gone, right? We take away the most annoying removal piece, and Jabba just being so big means he's going to stick around for a while. And then when you start realizing that, hey, I can go ahead and play Cunning on my Jabba, and they're not going to kill my Jabba because it has 8 defense, and then swing for 6, like, that's pretty good. And hey, we didn't minus because we asked our opponent to discard a card. So, we stayed neutral and got to swing for 6 that turn. Cunning is also a great way to kill enemy leaders. So when they play their Boba, you can play Cunning and give +4 to any units, and then you're going to be pretty happy. I guess the last thing we could probably talk about is why we chose Boba in the first place. A lot of people, we see a lot of Boba, and the reason he's the best is just because of his stats. Like a 4 attack and 7 defense, like people gravitate towards this. Him and coming out on like 5 resources, it's just so solid that there's really no reason when you're playing yellow black to play Thrawn unless you have this deck that's skewed to the very late game and you have a very specific goal in mind, right? But when we're just playing a generic event deck, we probably want to be using the generic good hero. Boba Fett also untapping resources does come in handy with our deck because that our curve is so low. We'll be able to get in a couple more of these spells. We might even be able to start with a no good to me dead in the mirror. You could probably just instantly win if you no good to me dead their Boba, and then you get to swing with Boba. You get to regain some resources and then play something else. That's very strong. Same with, if you get to go Bosk first and Bosk stays alive. And then Boba attacks, untaps 2 resources. You get to play, I don't know, a surprise strike on another unit, hit him for 3, and your Bosk is dealing 2 damage. Like I said, this deck does have legs. I think it is really strong. And that's the one thing I like about Star Wars. I've built a lot of decks now, and I feel like a lot of these decks feel really powerful. Like they're not bad. Like there's a lot of ways to build lots of good decks, and I really encourage you guys to go out there, see what cards you have, put them together. I am doing that budget series right now, so if you guys, don't have all these legendaries, I would definitely check those videos out. My next budget deck will be coming out early next week on Monday or Tuesday, so you can stay tuned for that. But otherwise, otherwise, guys, we can't even say it. That's okay. Anyways, thank you so much for watching. As always, peace.